Sorry.
Have a good joke.
Split screen was there.
Best jokes are rather extensive or inappropriate. Oh.
Yeah.
We need to probably ask how appropriate you consider, yeah, more better to be in one of these.
Okay.
Just looking for like a bad joke.
Oh, I did, yeah. It's impressive considering how many of those my dad has.
Probably just attention, forget.
Yeah, that's like.
It's good with it. I have that.
Something about binary joke, base, switching
What
to
did
base
the
3 trigger.
Zero say.
I spelled.
It's.
Good on you.
There are 10 types of people in this world, those who understand binary, and those who don't. As well as those who were not expecting a base 3 joke.
You lost me.
I grew up with programmers for parents.
That one I got.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna hit record so we can go ahead and get started and sorry, it was already recording. Look at that. I was smart enough to hit auto record.
It's on the record.
Not officially, because you didn't call the meeting to order yet.
Okay, are we ready?
Yeah, you can call it to order whenever you're ready, and then I'll go over the protocols.
Okay, guys, I call the meeting to order. Go ahead, Heather.
All right. See if I can find my mouse again. Sorry. There we go. Well, let's try that again. Sorry. I've got to figure out a better way to navigate this. And if you're watching us and joining us online, my apologies for the slowness here on multiple screens, and sometimes that gets a little challenging when they're so far apart.
Watching you.
There we go. Yeah. One day it'll be smoother. Stop again. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Heather Sandine, and I am serving as the technical host for tonight's meeting. Thank you for your grace and patience as we all adjust to this, I want to say new platform, but it's really just being back in person and dealing with tech and in person at the same time. We're all learning and we appreciate your understanding with any technical issues that may pop up today. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit bouldercolorado.gov/services/productive-atmospheres. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak by using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their full name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking that button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. If you have joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. We'll remark to public comment. here, Anand, you can take it away.
First item in the agenda will be the new member oath of office. Do you wanna, I think you did the last time for Alex and Brooke.
Yeah, we just have them read it out loud, or we can read it and you can repeat it, whichever you prefer.
Any preference?
You could read it, and I'll repeat it.
Okay?
And just really quickly, so the board understands, we do this upfront, that way you have 2 additional voting members. Though we don't have anything that you're really gonna be voting on tonight, it's just the way we kind of manage the process.
So in front of you, I just placed 2 blank copies. Those will be for you to sign. And then we just save those for our records. Right. Armand, do you mind reading them and they can repeat it?
We do it together. It's just like synchronizing.
Is that okay? All right. So they're in there and you can just pause at their name and let them fill in their own name.
All right, let's start. I do your name,
Greg Hill.
Hannah Davis.
do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
Do solemnly swear to
That I will
support
support the
the
Constitution of the United States.
of America,
and of the state of Colorado,
state of Colorado,
and the charter and ordinances of the city of Boulder,
And ordinances of the city of Boulder.
and faithfully perform the duties
Faithfully perform the duties
of the office of a member
of
Office of a member.
of the Environmental Advisory Board,
The Environmental Advisory Board.
which I am about to enter.
which
I am about to enter.
That's it. I think you guys need to sign your document, date it.
And Greg, I can help you sign that after the meeting.
And it's usually helpful. Oh, there it is.
And then
It's actually very cool.
right there.
Is there a date?
I don't believe so, but we can throw it.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny format. So it says this blank day of blank 2023. So you'll put 6
We can fill
there.
that into.
Yeah.
It's.
Yeah, we'll do that part.
Correct.
All right, your official members, congratulations. I think that deserves an applause.
I got excited. All right, let's move on to the next item, which is the approval of the minutes. So I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting on July 12th. And
Second the motion.
thank you. Also approved. And now let's move on to public participation.
We have 1 public participant, Tori, but they have not indicated that they'd like to participate. Tori, if you would like to participate, just use the raise hand function, and we'll call on you. Not seeing a raised hand. So I think we can move on.
Okay. The next item will be the discussion items for today, starting with the University Hill General Improvement District update. So did you guys take it away?
Yeah, look, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, I'm gonna tee this up a little bit for the board. Just so everybody is a little bit familiar with the process for tonight. So we have a couple of informational items. There's not a lot in terms of any votes or really specific feedback that we're seeking from the board tonight. But as you recall, we've been going through this process of looking at the council agenda, looking at the items that council is making recommendations on or providing feedback to staff. And one of the items was some of the the Hill revitalization efforts. You would signal that you'd like to hear a little bit more about what's going on up there. So really delighted that Regan Brown is the senior project manager in community vitality is going to be providing an update on a couple of items that she carried forward really successfully, I might add, to city council about a month ago. And then your second item is going to be a discussion about the city's policy agenda or policy statement. Carl Castillo is our senior policy manager for the city. He'll be joining us in a little bit. And the intent of that one is to give the board an understanding of how the city goes about formulating its policy statement that they take to city council. This outlines really the platform from which departments really work on policy related items, whether we are advocating for or against a particular legislative item or any particular regulations. We use that as our backstop to think about our policy guide, so to speak. And so Carl will be here to talk a bit about how he goes through that process of updating that on an annual basis. And then to hit some high points that he thinks are really relevant for the board to either understand or potentially provide feedback before he goes to council. So those are the two big informational items. It's going to be a lot of talking at, and so apologies for that, but it's a lot of rich conversation. And so if you have questions, obviously along the way, I don't need to say any more. Regan, I'll pass it over to you and let you roll.
Sure, thanks, Jonathan. Are you gonna be sharing screens by chance? I sent them to you,
Yes, I can do that.
if you don't mind. Okay. But nice to meet everyone. As Jonathan said, I'm Regan Brown. I'm a senior project manager with the city's Community Vitality Department. So for those who are unfamiliar, Community Vitality, we oversee and manage the city's special taxing districts, which ultimately enhances economic vitality within the city, attracts diverse businesses and visitors to our key economic centers. We ensure access for all, so making sure that folks are able to access these key economic centers, getting to and from. And then lastly, we also house the Office of Arts and Culture and special events. So we do a lot. Our three pillars: access for all, cultural vibrancy, and then district vitality. They're kind of all intertwined. So thank you, Heather. But yeah, I'm excited to provide you all with an update on our efforts related to University Hill commercial area revitalization. We went to City Council for a study session on August 10th, presenting our recommendations for implementing broad revitalization efforts in the near term on the Hill, as well as some longer term efforts that really focus in on redeveloping the 14th Street service parking lot located within the University Hill Commercial District. So I'll essentially just be sharing the same presentation that I delivered to council, a little more condensed, hoping to get through it in 15 minutes or so. So I'll go over a background of the Hill, including some key issues that we're seeing today. Key considerations that helped inform our recommendations, next steps, and then I'll open it up to any questions y'all may have. Sorry, I'll direct you. You can go to the next one. So I'll just start by providing some brief notable characteristics of the University Hill neighborhood at large for those who might not be familiar. The Hill dates back to the late 19th century. It's full of rich history and qualities that really make it unique to other areas of the city. It has a really rich music history, especially in the 1960s, when there were a lot of entertainment venues and concerts that drew large crowds to the area. It's known for its innovative and vibrant spirit, especially given its proximity to the university. And then lastly, it connects two really large populations. So we have the CU student population, and then we have a fairly large residential community adjacent to a small 3-block commercial district. So it's really unique in that way as well. We can go to the next slide. And so that small 3-block commercial district, it's the University Hill General Improvement District. This is also pronounced UGID, the acronym. It's one of Boulder's special taxing districts. And UGID and some of the key sites that I'll be referencing here are laid out on the map on the left-hand side. So it was established in 1970 at the request of property owners who wanted to tax themselves in order to purchase land that could provide customers with additional parking spaces. One of those parcels of land is the 14th Street surface parking lot, which I'll be referencing. And is the only remaining general improvement district owned lot in the commercial district. UGID recently sold its other parking asset, the Pleasant Street lot, to facilitate the development of the Hill Hotel. And as many of you know, there are several new developments underway on the Hill. So that includes the Hill Hotel and then the CU Conference Center, which will inevitably have a large impact on the district. But even in the face of this rapid growth, UGID has been experiencing a state of economic stagnation for several decades. And we've heard continuously from community members that they've expressed concerns of feeling unsafe. Residents have described limited access to a diverse retail mix. And then connectivity to and from downtown and within the district is a challenge as well.
I'm sorry, can you give us 1 second? I just got a message saying that people online are unable to see the screen.
Oh, okay.
Let me just try to close a few things and try that again. See the mouse from here, it's very layered.
And if it's easier for me to join the Zoom meeting, I can also control the slides. Just let me know.
Try to put it on. Tori, do you mind confirming if you can see that or not? Stop sharing and reshare. How about now? And let's try one more option. I can, unfortunately, if I try to move it to the other screen, not everyone will be able to see it, so we can try a side by side view if that's not going to be too distracting. Okay, is that any better? You can see part of it. Still only seeing part of it. Okay, they said that's better. All right.
Awesome. Need me to repeat anything here?
No.
Okay, we can go on to the next slide then. All right, now I'm going to dive into some key issues that we're seeing on the Hill, and I'm going to start by going over the current regulatory conditions. So UGID has a set of ordinances that are really unique in comparison to the rest of the city, and those key regulations are displayed here on this slide. I'll start with the one on the left. Due to concerns with alcohol overconsumption, City Council adopted Boulder Revised Code 965B in October 2013. This requires that at least 50% of any eating places sales on the Hill must be from the sale of food. So there's no requirement related to this in the rest of the city. And then these same establishments, so restaurants that serve alcohol, must close no later than 11 p.m. unless grandfathered in. And it's 2 a.m. in the rest of the city. And then going to the one on the right-hand side, so in 2015, Boulder Revised Code 963B was adopted to address the concern that the economic environment strongly favors student rental housing within UGID, making it difficult for other diverse land uses to compete, and really posed a threat to the vibrancy of the commercial district. So in August 2014, council passed a temporary moratorium, which was then extended in 2015 and subsequently changed to restrict all new housing within UGID to be permanently affordable. So in summary, the Hill is a lot more regulated compared to the rest of the city. And we've heard from many businesses that regarding the ordinance on the left-hand side, that this is actually fairly difficult to achieve because the restaurant industry does really rely heavily on the sale of alcohol as their primary source of revenue. And I do want to note here, this is something that's come up since the study session, that the planning department is currently working on ordinance changes which will streamline review processes for restaurants within our neighborhood centers. This is all part of an effort, the 15-minute neighborhoods concept. So meaning our basic needs can be accessed within 15 minutes via walking, biking, or by transit. So given that this ordinance change would group all our neighborhood centers under the same umbrella in terms of review processes for restaurants, it would eliminate that 50% food requirement and that 11 p.m. closing restriction on the Hill. So the first reading for this is going to council on October 19th. So we'll be really curious to see how that plays out. But one other thing I want to note is that there has been a lot of pushback from community members on this topic. It's pretty contentious given the history of alcohol overconsumption on the Hill. So the planning board is actually recommending that the Hill be removed from this ordinance change and recommends that council direct city staff to engage in a deeper public engagement process before changing any regulations on the Hill related to business requirements. We can go to the next slide. Safety has been an ongoing challenge within UJID and the broader Hill area. The Hill Reinvestment Working Group, which was formed in 2015 to pursue a Hill reinvestment strategy, has placed a lot of attention on the issue of safety. But the commercial district still really struggles with challenges related to safety and crime. We've heard from local business owners. They've expressed their frustrations around certain behaviors occurring in front of their storefronts and elsewhere in the commercial district, including panhandling, loitering, public drug use, etc. So, and just to note a couple recent efforts to try to mitigate these challenges, we received a pretty generous contribution from CU to provide an additional $45,000 annually to expand the ambassador program on the Hill. And for those who are not aware, ambassadors provide cleaning, safety, and hospitality services downtown and on University Hill. And then it's also important to mention just some other improvement efforts. We did a landscaping project at the intersection of 13th and Pennsylvania this past year. And we work really closely with the Hill Boulder Merchants Association on activations and business support and retention efforts. But even with these efforts, there are still a lot of improvements and opportunities to improve safety within the area. We can go to next. Another key issue that we're facing on the Hill is related to UJID's fund health. There's limited capacity to fund general improvements with the district's property tax revenues, which amounts to significantly less than any of Boulder's other special districts. UJID relies heavily on the general fund in contrast to our other special districts. So the general fund transfer helps offset UJID expenses related to general fund activities such as the EcoPass program and the administration and maintenance of the on-street parking meter program. Some funding strategies that have been raised in discussion to tackle this issue include establishing a downtown development authority, which could help fund general improvements and additional programs. And for those of you who are unaware, a downtown development authority, a DDA for short, is a strategy used to revitalize commercial districts and can provide for a variety of funding options, including millage and tax increment financing for public improvements in commercial districts. And there also continues to be interest in the possibility of establishing a business improvement district on the Hill that could provide long-term operating dollars to support operations such as cleanliness and activations. And the last thing I'll say here is there are a lot of trade-offs to be considered related to the reinvestment of the Pleasant Street lot sale proceeds. So as I mentioned earlier, we sold the Pleasant Street lot to help facilitate the development of the Hill Hotel. Delayed reinvestment of those funds, which are currently sitting in savings, earning interest, really only prolongs the limited access due to the decrease in parking spaces and redevelopment of the 14th Street lot, which could ultimately result in additional property tax, retail lease, or parking revenue. But according to our current budget assumptions, reinvesting those funds in 2025 would actually result in a negative fund balance for UGID by 2027. So again, it's just really important that any revitalization strategies need to take the fund health into consideration. We really want to maintain a healthy operational district. Next slide. All right, and then business retention challenges. The commercial district on the Hill really caters heavily to the student population and has struggled for decades to attract a diverse mix of uses. As it stands today, there's a 14% commercial vacancy rate. And the business mix is depicted on the right-hand side here. So as you can see, there are a lot of restaurants, but also personal care services, convenience stores. There's retail such as smoke and skate shops, etc., kind of catering to that student population, as I mentioned. And some points of comparison that I want to call out, not necessarily apples to apples, but the retail vacancy rate for the entire city of Boulder in December 2021 was 4.7%. In the United States, vacancy rates across the retail sector hit an average of 4.4% in the second quarter of 2022. So again, not really apples to apples, just given the dates of those data points, but as you can see on the Hill, 14% vacancy rate is quite high. We can go to the next slide. All right, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I do just want to point out that UGID has been the focus of a lot of studies over the years. Some notable ones outlined here, the University Hill sub-area plan. This was a sketch plan building a vision for the community based on needs around public safety, connectivity, economic growth. 2011 Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Panel Program. We've been awarded this opportunity for the Hill twice now, and I'll dive into what that program is briefly on the next slide. For those who aren't familiar, it's ULI TAP for short. The purpose of the ULI TAP in 2011 was to assess revitalization strategies for the district, but this was again over a decade ago, so it's a bit outdated. The Central Broadway Corridor Design Framework 2017. This is a guiding document recommending urban design improvements along Broadway, including how to better connect the Hill to downtown. In 2021, we contracted with Economic and Planning Systems, EPS, to undertake a feasibility study for the 14th Street lot. This ultimately resulted in recommending a primary strategy of pursuing market rate housing on that site, which of course faces important limitations given the current regulatory environment and the ordinance related to permanently affordable housing. And then in 2023, in June, we again convened with the ULI TAP, in which I'll outline key recommendations from their findings later in the presentation. You can go to the next slide, Heather. Thanks. So I'll just spend a brief moment here going over exactly what ULI TAP is, since it really does speak to our recommendations. It's an opportunity that provides a matching grant from DRCOG to support 2 studies in 2 Denver metro communities. The program provides awardees with a panel of volunteers with ULI expertise to help us work through a pressing, typically land use related challenge. It's valued at over $20,000 and ultimately provides communities with recommendations addressing their problem statement. So in our case, we asked the panel to address challenges we're seeing on the Hill through the redevelopment of the 14th Street lot, but also broader strategies, recognizing that tackling a lot of these challenges on the Hill requires a multi-pronged approach. You can go to the next slide. All right, and I'll just briefly kind of tie it all together before diving into the recommendations, because it's important to understand why we're tackling this work now. based on a lot of community and stakeholder feedback that city staff has received, we understood that a lot of the previous studies are either outdated or maybe took a bit too narrow of an approach on specific elements of the district. So we really wanted to revisit broad strategies for the district, which was kind of the catalyst for engaging with ULI, that ULI panel again in 2023. As I mentioned, the district continues to struggle with some of these economic and social challenges that I've outlined, from business retention to safety to funding sustainability concerns. Pat brought up a really great point that I love repeating, which is once the hotels are complete, people are gonna exit the lobby and decide to go right or left, whether it's downtown or to the Hill Commercial District. And so we really want to address these challenges and make the Hill more welcoming as we start to see this influx of visitors. And on that note, we see an opportunity to invest in strategies that complement the new developments underway. So rather than waiting to see how they impact the district, let's be proactive and leverage it as an opportunity to implement complementary strategies. And then lastly, it's time to respond to an increasing community desire to see positive change. It's a really special place for a lot of people, has a rich history, and it's an important part of Boulder's character. So we want to act on that now. Next slide. And we can just go right to the next one. So we've identified a lot of key considerations that will help guide our work and decision-making around specific projects. The first being long-term fund health for UGID, ensuring we develop a financial approach to the long-term viability of the district. Parking and access, ensuring people are able to access the district, whether through an increase in parking availability or other forms of transportation. Connectivity. Getting to the Hill, whether through providing better connection along 13th Street or another mode, is a key consideration. And then lastly, economic vitality and resilience. It's important that any strategy contribute to long-term or positive growth. We can just go right into the next one. So our recommendations, again, were derived from our most recent convening from ULI. The panel presented a lot of these recommendations that I'm going to outline here. And they take the form of two approaches. So one approach focuses on these broader revitalization strategies, which we'd like to implement in the near term. And the other approach narrows in on the longer term 14th Street lot redevelopment strategies. So the three categories that our broad revitalization recommendations fell into include understanding and establishing a district identity, connecting and activating the district. Next slide. District identity, we want to use this as an opportunity to understand, establish, and promote the Hills identity to the city at large. We'd like to take time to engage with the community to better understand the Hills identity, given that it has evolved and there are a lot of upcoming changes to the district. And once identified, we want to leverage those characteristics and promote it to the rest of the city in a way that will make it more identifiable and more attractive to visitors. And beyond enhancing the district identity, the Hill would benefit from improved pedestrian wayfinding to help create that sense of place and community, and help folks navigate the district within. We can go to the next slide. Connecting UGID is another recommendation. So this suggests improving connectivity to better integrate UGID with the broader community. Improving connectivity along 13th Street in particular aligns with suggestions from other city plans. Making the Hill easier to get to and improving navigation within is a need and an opportunity that we've heard repeatedly. We can go to the next slide. So this map was created by the panel from ULI, and it really helps us visualize how the Hill can be better connected to the rest of the city, including to downtown. So as you can see, they suggest improved entrances along 13th Street and on Broadway with kind of that direct identifiable connection from Pearl Street all the way to Chautauqua. And we want to explore this further. I mean, what does improved entrances really mean? We don't really have the answer to that yet. I think one of the intent is to bring on a planning and design consultant to really help us better understand what that would look like, but this is kind of just a high level idea. You go to the next slide. And then lastly, we want to activate the district. We're partnering with the Hill Boulder Merchants Association on some upcoming events, but we really see an opportunity to expand on that, leveraging and building on the Hill's creativity and energy, potentially revitalizing positive nightlife in the neighborhood, and implementing other events, maybe doing some alleyway improvements as well. Go to the next slide. And so now narrowing in on the 14th Street lot. So these recommendations take the form of two different directions, which include maintaining UGID ownership or oversight, and then in building a structure on that parcel of land, or alternatively selling or leasing the lot to a private developer. So looking here on this slide, this suggests that we sell or lease the lot through a 100-year land lease to a private developer, in which the city would determine what could replace the existing surface lot. And some potential outcomes identified in the TAP, with example photos on the left here include a boutique hotel, a social club, a food and community hub. There are really a whole array of options for that site. And then revenue from the sale of the lot could be used towards an endowment as a way of offering UGID long-term financial sustainability. Slide. And if we maintain oversight, there were three recommendations that the TAP outlined. One is the maximum parking garage option, which could be a 3-level parking garage structure, providing additional 150 parking spaces. The other is the parking with retail, which presents an opportunity for a large retail tenant, such as a grocery store in the middle there. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, a parking garage with retail and faculty housing. So this could be an opportunity to partner with CU while addressing some of the retail and parking challenges that we've seen on the Hill. Go to the next slide. So in summary, we recommend that prioritizing broader strategies in the near term would benefit the district in that it will enhance district vitality, it'll generate that positive economic growth, while also providing UGID with an opportunity to adapt to a lot of the upcoming changes with the new developments. And it also gives staff time to focus on creating a broader district-wide strategy that will help inform a reinvestment strategy for the 14th Street lot down the road. We can go to the next slide. So lastly, I'll just outline some next steps here. Again, we went to council presenting essentially the same information on August 10th. We received a lot of support from council for these efforts. And our recommendations, especially related to tackling some of the regulatory barriers that exist within UGID. And although it's not directly outlined as a recommendation in the presentation, one of our questions that we posed to council during the study session was whether they'd like staff to explore code changes that are unique to the Hill. And so during that meeting, the majority of council members expressed support for removing the ordinance, particularly related to the 50% food sale requirement and that 11 p.m. Closing time on the Hill for restaurants. And there was a lot of support for the broad revitalization strategies as well, especially as it relates to activating the district and enhancing that sense of place. And so next steps, just in summary, include facilitating coordination among other city departments. Successful revitalization on the Hill will really require cross-departmental involvement. So that would be an immediate next step. We'd also like to develop an RFP to secure planning and design consultant services to again help us identify feasible and actionable projects that can be executed in the near term that speak to connecting, activating the district. And then, of course, any revitalization efforts will involve broader community and stakeholder engagement as we move through this process. Next slide. So that was a ton of info, but I hope it made sense. I'm happy to answer any questions.
We'll allocate about 15 minutes for questions, so maybe 3 minutes each.
Okay with you guys? I guess I'll just start and we'll go around. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's a lot of information, but
It's a lot, yeah.
I mean, I just have some more questions just to have more information about it. How does the 50% food requirement work? I've seen that a lot in Kansas, which is a very religious state. And all these bars need to have like 50% requirement. Like, is it like that the menu needs to be 50% food or?
No, it's the revenue from the sale of food and alcohol, so 50% of their revenue needs to be from the sale of food.
How do you control that? I mean, people like drinks, like how does that work?
So I think that really falls in the finance department's realm. I'm kind of looking at you, Jonathan. I don't know if you know.
I don't know how that works, but
I
I
can
think
imagine
it's,
it'd be finance.
yeah, I think it's a taxation issue and I'm happy to look it up as we're thinking if I can figure out how that actually works.
I'm just curious because I think that a lot of Kansas, like I said, and usually it's just the plate, the retail plate, like the bar or restaurant.
Sure.
You have 50% of the menu should be food, which can be whatever, little snacks, and then 50% or the rest can be like actual alcohol, which is what they want to sell.
Right.
But there's no tracking on how much they sell, it's just the menu.
In our packet, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, it said that at any time restaurants or these establishments could be asked to hand over their receipts for the last month in total, that they had to provide them in X number of days. So I think it's I got the impression it's a bit of a random search.
Yeah,
Enforcement.
Yeah, I think enforcement's a random search. I think on the restaurant side, if I had to take a shot in the dark, I'm not educated on this at all, but I assume the intent behind it would be at a certain point, restaurant owners have to stop selling alcohol because then they would hit more than 50% of their revenue being alcohol. And so they just could not sell alcohol anymore, given that the intent of the intent of it was to limit the sale of alcohol and the overconsumption of alcohol. That would be my guess, is just that it's on the restaurant owners or the manager on shift or whatever to be keeping track of sales and what percentage of that is alcohol, what percentage of that is food. And if it's getting too imbalanced, if the city can call for a random search of their audit, that they just have to stop selling alcohol.
Yeah, and that's a very likely possibility. It's kind of on the business owner and they could be enforced at any point.
And that's something you want to change, you said, right? Or you're looking.
We're exploring
Exploring.
changing that code, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry if I missed it. Did you touch on what could be causing the 13% vacancy rate?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of factors there. I mean, business retention has been a challenge on the Hill for decades. And I think it just struggles as a district. Again, there's kind of these two competing populations, the CU student population and the residential community. And for a while, I think it's been a bit contentious. And again, the commercial district really caters to that student population. Yeah, I think it's a variety of factors.
Is it a trend? Like, is it stable always for teen? Like in the last decade, has it gotten worse?
I think it's gotten worse in the last few decades, it's gotten worse, yeah. And COVID exacerbated it,
Oh,
yeah.
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 Are the business rental prices comparable within that district compared to others? Is it a rent fee, like is a rent? Is that included in the?
That's a good question. From what I've heard, I think they're a little less than downtown, but I mean, still up there. I would have to do a little bit more digging on that. That's a good question.
Thank you again for the really comprehensive presentation. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So one of my questions, I guess, stems from, you've obviously looked a lot into the struggles with accessing the district, whether it be by car or bus or bike, walking, and obviously a big barrier to biking and walking is the fact that it's on the hill. Do you know how much control we would have over like e-bike station placement? Or if you wanted to rent a bike, just going from the downtown area up to the hill, is that potential pathway towards increasing that accessibility without flooding the area with cars and?
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, we have a great relationship with B-Cycle, and so I think it would just be a matter of working with them and kind of identifying some docking stations up there. I don't know which ones currently exist, but certainly a possibility. And there's a great bus network on the hill too. So kind of promoting that. Yeah.
And then I think at one point in the packet, it kind of talked about recognizing that there's a multi-use trail on one side of the street, but it's obviously on the campus side as opposed to on the retail businesses side. Is that part of the conversation at all of making, obviously, probably not making both sides multi-use trail, but kind of the connection between the two sides of the street?
I'm not sure. That would be primarily housed in transportation and mobility, but that's a good question. That's something I'll certainly take note of and bring back to them, because again, this is a cross-departmental effort, so.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you again. So. You have a lot of information that I see applies for the city council to make the decisions, but being the environmental advisory board just begs the question of what aspects of climate or, the city's climate action plan are included in that. And then also like in regards to that, parking in a conference center that I've heard holds several thousand people. That
I can't remember the numbers off the top of my
Okay,
head.
I thought it was several thousand, so I'm thinking 150 more parking spaces. Just lends to, like people at CU, UMC events, they're gonna be using that parking lot, maybe. It doesn't, it makes it more difficult to find parking in that space. So one of the things I had read a few years ago actually was some sort of study about some sort of like a gondola system going from the conference center to downtown. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't heard that it's moving forward. However, connection from downtown to the hill has been an ongoing conversation even since before I onboarded. And still is certainly part of the conversation. I don't think the gondola is moving forward though.
Okay.
You're shaking your head.
It's one of those things that has been talked about and reared up. I think every couple of years, it's another conversation in terms of accessibility and moving people to and from the downtown area to the hill. And I think depending on your point of view, there are different schools of thought on whether or not that would be a wise investment, whether or not we need to look at other alternatives. I think now as we're expanding like our Be Safer program and all of those cycles now are electric. Thinking about new global opportunities. There's a lot of discussion in revitalizing that whole arboretum pathway, make sure that it's safe and accessible for people to walk up and down that hill. And again, it's a conversation I think the council has on an ongoing basis as new councils are seated. It's another conversation that I think has not found the most seamless solution, I guess. So if that's something that the board wanted to bring back up as a potential option, and there's been a lot of analysis on whether or not that would be a good option for Boulder or not.
And then there will continue to be analysis on just better connection from from the hill to downtown. I mean, one of the broad revitalization strategies is better connecting those two neighborhoods. And so we'd love to bring on a consultant to help us explore actionable projects for that.
Yeah, so I guess coming back to what climate action initiatives are included in any new developments.
I don't know that I can answer that. All I can say is that any initiative or project that we execute, it will align with Boulder's sustainability and resilience framework and the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. And so it's certainly an important question and one that will be considered in any project that we implement.
I don't know, I'm pretty short on questions. It was a very comprehensive presentation. Thank you for that. I know you're not looking for recommendations, but in this case,
Yeah.
I specifically around the 14th Street lot, adding 100 more parking spaces is not going to fix the parking situation. Like with downtown, there's what, 2 garages plus a number of surface lots plus a whole bunch of street parking, and it's still short on parking. And so, given the close proximity to campus and the relative shortage of like amenity resources on campus for students that are living in dorms, I think it would be great to see and encourage more like grocery stores and making it a not just a like college student bar place.
The Hill does need a grocery store.
It does. As when I was as a student, luckily I lived off campus, so I didn't have to like rely on Uni Hill, but if I had been living in dorms, I would have been pretty screwed for walkable
Yeah,
amenities that are not specifically geared towards like the sort of junk food aesthetic of college. And so any steps that could be taken in any renovations that could to encourage a, wider diversity of accessible amenities for students. I think is a big one, and then that would encourage, less car traffic and
yeah.
help make the space feel safer. If there are more stores than convenience stores and smoke shops.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's wonderful feedback and speaks to that 15-minute neighborhood concept.
I have grown up in one of those and it has made life so much,
Yeah,
it's simpler and it's so nice to not have to drive 30 minutes to go to the grocery store. And that is something that I think we should be encouraging, especially for students.
yeah.
Because they're so sort of limited in their space that they can access. So encouraging their ability to have access to that is, I think, huge. And so I'd love to see a bend in that direction if possible.
It's great.
I would second that. Yeah, plus on that, and I'll say it wouldn't just be for students.
Yeah.
I think that could be the thing that would bring together neighborhood.
Right.
And students, because it's a nice grocery store.
Well, and that's the thing, we're trying to, with all this work, create a zipper rather than a divide.
Yeah.
These two large populations, and so that could be a really great strategy.
And then I just have one question, on the budget and the use of funds, the biggest line item looks to be parking and access, what is? Can you say more about what that is?
On the use of funds.
Yeah.
Access.
So there's like the revenue you get from parking meters or whatever. And then the parking and access line item. Curious.
I might have to get back to you on that one. I don't wanna misspeak. Yeah, I have an idea, but I don't know. I don't wanna be incorrect there, so I can certainly circle back. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else?
Actually, one more question, the graph or the picture you showed that was connecting Pearl Street to the hill, was that a car path, a bike path, sort of?
Bike multi-use path,
Okay.
Yeah.
it's just sidewalk.
I guess the biggest question for me is just ultimately, I would like to hear in a presentation personally to this board, to have something about what initiatives, what are you doing specifically to help the city move towards a resilient and sustainable the future, or if you have anything on University Hill Conference Center or hotel. I mean, I'm slightly disappointed at like even CU Environmental Center is just another basic building. And so if we really want to move towards this climate action, what are we doing? So I'd like to know.
Well, there is the, energy building curves, which have been updating this year, and they're gonna come to us actually next month. So any new developments will have to follow, adhere to that, building code, for example, that seeks to, reduce the environmental impact of new developments. So I don't know if that's kind of like you're looking for somewhat, I mean.
It would be
that's
partial, for sure.
Jonathan, you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Greg, I appreciate you raising the question, and I'm gonna take a swing at this a little bit, and I would just love to encourage you to think about specific tactics that you might think as good candidates for this particular area. And I think as Hernan was describing, one way we can think about this is how do we deal with our existing building stock, right? So there is new construction, and we have one of the more aggressive codes in the country when it comes to new construction. Even though we don't signal that gas is disallowed, the way we measure performance in new construction really essentially forces all gas and fossil fuels out of the design of the buildings. At certain levels, it has to be net zero to begin with. We'll be talking with the board next month about updates to the energy code and how we're really using that, not to just keep turning the dial on efficiency, but really starting to get the outcomes that we want in terms of the performance or miles per gallon we get from our buildings. Then there's the other piece, which is thinking about embodied carbon within buildings as well. So where are those high value points where we can really address emissions in the way we build our buildings, and then thinking about the reuse, deconstruction, and reuse of those buildings ultimately at some point in the future. So there's kind of how we manage our buildings, how we construct our buildings, but there's a whole lot more, I think, that you're signaling in terms of how we integrate the, and I really wanted to appreciate Regan's comment about this as a multi-departmental approach. So I would not assume that this is Community Vitality's job to think about solving, but what they do is they reach out and work with other departments, including mine, to say, how do we integrate some of the objectives that we are trying to push forward in terms of natural cooling strategies? How do we think about impermeable surfaces and thinking about our ecosystems management, thinking about transportation and density and all of those kind of things. And so it's not always evident when it shows up in a staff memo talking about the development that those things have been contemplated, but that's how we do our work in the city. But I guess I wanted to encourage you, if you think about the presentation you just heard, and there are opportunities that you feel like may be missed. I heard some good ones around some of the transportation alternatives and options that we should probably stress. But if there are others, let's talk about those, because I think now is a great time to think about how we integrate those.
Okay.
Long explanation, but I just want to give you the assurance that we don't work in isolation in these various departments who really think about how we work together. So,
Yeah, and actually, may I speak on that point of like, the article I'd read way back a while ago about the gondola idea had me starting to think about it, and I came across a company called Swift Rails. Instead of a gondola, it's a rail system, and I've actually called them and just to talk and find out about stuff, and it's the type of thing that if they developed it from, say, the Hill to downtown, would be expandable easily to go either farther north or south on Broadway or out towards Longmont or whatever. Like, it's the type of thing that could grow into something that would be move people quickly, especially for a conference center that what I had read was 2,000 people. You know, and so is that 1,000 more cars coming into, you know, the Hill for an event?
good point.
Thank you so much for coming and giving this presentation.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Really great feedback. I left some of my business cards here. If you want to reach out, any questions come up. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Our piece of pizza on the way out.
Yeah.
There's a lot. How would you prefer for me to run your slides, or would you like to do that?
That'd be great. Not sure how I would share it otherwise.
I don't need to do much more of a tee up. I think I gave you a little bit of color of what this presentation, but I certainly want to just give a warm welcome to Carl Castillo. I've worked with and known Carl for many, many years, actually since I started with the city, and Carl is really a thought leader in thinking about how we really design our policies at the city, and he is incredibly well connected, and I call on him pretty regularly. In my department, as we think about the policies that we want to pursue, again, at the federal level, in many cases, certainly at the state level, and he is a great champion for our work in this space. And so again, I think the intention here was to give you all an update on the policy statement and how that's shaping up, but more the process that I think Carl really shepherds throughout the various departments before he takes that to city council for ultimately their adoption and approval.
Adoption, I'm not sure of either one.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, I'll turn it over to you, Carl. And if you want me to gush about you a little more, I can.
More than that. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Brooke and Hernan, I think you heard my presentation last year. Is that correct? I know Brooke, you were, Hernan.
I think so, right?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I am reusing a lot of the PowerPoint slides, so apologies in advance. I'll think three of you. I'm not gonna talk about this online, but we do for all of you. So in any event, we'll be talking a little bit about some new stuff as well. Thanks for putting that online. As Jonathan said, I'm the chief policy advisor. Essentially, it's primarily intergovernmental affairs, so helping the city coordinate a variety of efforts with other cities, other counties, the state, regional organizations, the federal government. And a lot of times that has to do with advocacy, advocating for policies that can influence our community for the better. So today I wanted to speak a little bit about what that looks like from an environmental perspective, hopefully touching on the interest that this board has. Next slide. I'm actually going to get a copy of this and hand it out to you. I actually had copies of the current policy status. Before I leave, I'm gonna walk out, get it from my office, bring it over, and hand it over to you. It'll be good for you to have. This policy statement includes the principles that council is giving us advance direction to support. So there's like 60 or so principles, and it's broken down to like high level principles and then more specific examples. Actually, I apologize. Those are positions. There's actually principles as well, which are like fundamental ones like equity and collaboration, things of that nature. The positions are the ones that I meant to say. There's about 64 high level ones that have examples. We also identify certain priorities where we're gonna focus our greatest attention. And it's really, well, I think the next slide might allow us to. I realize it isn't as easy for me to have someone else use the PowerPoint slide. Okay, so purpose of the policy statement. The reason we do this is because we are often given the opportunity to advocate, and we want to make sure that we're doing so on behalf of the city council. So some cities actually go to their councils and their commissions as bills or regulations are introduced, and they say, you know, can we advocate for or against this or amend it? That's actually a little too late to actually have influence. So this is an opportunity for us to be a little more proactive. So be general enough to anticipate what might come, but specific enough so that it's meaningful, so that council knows what they're buying off on. So the policy statement is that allows, well, I'm realizing it's such a hard for me not knowing what's on the next slide, but
Okay.
yeah, no, that's just.
You want me to just, if it's one that has multiple bullet points that load. we're
Can
gonna
you
make
just read my bullet points?
Here, I'll load everything up.
Okay, there you go. I won't ever do this again, but thank you. Oh, so you go.
Sorry, at least you can look at it here. This is not connected, but you can see the slides.
Yeah,
Thank you. Get it bigger.
the lack of control is killing me.
I know, you're.
Yeah, it's hard. I'm afraid that
Is that a policy of control?
policy control. Yeah. Yeah, this is awful. So, like I said, we advocate for many different bodies. These are some examples of the bodies that we advocate for. The ones that the one that I'm most known for is when the city is advocating at the state capitol. So on legislation. So, very, except we moved on to the next
Sorry,
slide.
that was a misclick. Apologies.
So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. I promise this presentation won't be this the entire time. Okay, so how do we do this? When do we do it? When the General Assembly comes to an end, see that's the primary forum where policies are made. We then start reviewing what passed and we make revisions, proposed revisions to the 2024 policy statement. I will be convening council's intergovernmental affairs committee, which is made up of 4 council members on October 11th. And they will then provide some comments. Departments, Jonathan and I just had a meeting today where we talked about one possible idea. Carolyn Elam, who I'm sure you know from their office, was just suggesting another idea. So I am basically the one who a lot of the ideas come to. And if it's not already in a policy statement, and if it seems like something the council would be interested in supporting, then I add it to the proposed draft for your consideration. Council then has an opportunity to provide their input before they actually adopt it. So this year they're scheduled to provide input on October 26th. And then I bring back the final, here's what I heard from council, including everything else that went into it. And they will hopefully approve it on October. Actually, it's gonna be, the date is wrong. It's gonna be early November, so my apologies for that. And then we have this policy statement booklet, and two things. One, we all use it so that we know what we can advocate for. And it's basically a way to make sure that we have uniform positions. And secondly, we give it to our legislators and we give it to other policymakers who are interested in knowing what's your position. And that way, at the very least, they can know that, oh, the city's interested in this issue. Let's call them up. Let's bring them to the table on these issues. And then we revise it at least once. So once the session begins, there's always bills that are introduced that we didn't anticipate. So we go back to council and we say, we have a few more things that you probably want to consider. So, for example, the last session, there was a huge land use bill, I'm sure many of you heard about. But we didn't know that that was coming. So in February, we went to council and said, now knowing that there's this gigantic land use bill that we know that you'd be interested in, here's a proposed position that we brought to your intergovernmental affairs committee, and we ask that you amend the policy statement to allow the city to engage in that bill. So that's just an example of the kind of revisions that we make. We can actually revise the policy statement whenever it's needed. So council can say, you know, we need to engage in this federal law, this regional issue, what have you. But just as a matter of course, it's approved twice a year. I'm already anticipating that this group would probably like to throw out some ideas. So I'm just letting you know the timeline. So obviously between now and late October will be wonderful to get any ideas. And I'll be taking notes after this presentation. Next slide, please. All right, so the advocacy team consists of me as a staff member. It also includes our 2 state lobbyists, Adam Lightberg and Wolf Coyne from Headwater Strategies. Also have Brett and Christian from Smith, Dolphin Andrews representing us in Washington, D.C. And then finally, we have our city council. And for that matter, we have all city officials, Jonathan certainly included, that are capable of advocating. The one thing that they all have in common with is they coordinate with me so that we make sure we have that uniform message so that we're not having different interpretations of what the policy statement says. But frankly, depending on who's going to be the best voice to hear from, maybe it's our police chief, maybe it's the mayor, maybe it's an expert, maybe it's someone like Carolyn Elam. Can speak in quite detail about utility matters. So the city has a presence both at the Capitol in terms of testifying on legislation, but it also has a presence in terms of the meetings that occur between committee hearings. So having one-on-one meetings with Senator Fenberg, for example, or with the coalition partners. Next slide, please. So like I said, there's a lot of advocates and there's a lot of experts, and these are some of the ones that are mostly involved. Climate initiatives, perhaps not as a surprise, is the department that I have worked with the most, generally speaking, because there's just been so much policy advocacy coming out of this group. It's actually been less so over the last couple of years, which is interesting, only because housing has, housing and homelessness, mental health, behavioral health, is perhaps, climate change, and perhaps under this recent council. These are examples of the departments that are primarily representing, although all departments, it could be HR issue, it could be an IT issue, will often have some policy needs. Next slide, please. And then recognizing that we are just one city, we are leveraging our ability to work and be effective by working with other coalitions, some of these coalitions and organizations that we actually created. So for example, CC4CA, the Colorado Communities for Climate Action. I'm sure you've heard about that group. It's a group that both Boulder and Boulder County created about 5 years ago or so. And now they have about 40 or so local government members. They have their own lobbyists and policy team. And so that's an example of the extreme where we say we want to create an entity on the specific issue of climate and make sure that we have greater power in trying to be effective. Of course, there's many others that are already in existence, like the Colorado Municipal League, which has existed, I think, for 100 years now. National League of City, Metro Mayor's Caucus, all of these have issues that may very well pertain to climate. Northwest Mayors and Commissioners Coalition is more about transportation, but as you know, of course, transportation and environmental issues overlap quite a bit. So these are examples of what allows us to be most effective, because it isn't enough just to go over as great of a city as we are to go down to the Capitol and say this is what we want. It does matter, and we do have powerful legislators and other policymakers who will represent our interests, but we are always at our most effective when we work with our partners, and these are great examples of ones that we work with. Next slide, please. So what I did is cut and paste from the table of contents the positions from the 2023 policy statement that pertain to climate change and community resilience. That's what you see here. And as you can see, it's across the board. For example, a variety of very interesting issues, ones that none of them I think would be a surprise to you. Not going to read them out to you, but if you just take a moment to scan through those, each one of these will then on that page 7, 8, 9, have a more detailed position with examples. That part I couldn't bring into the PowerPoint slide, but like I said, I'm going to give you a copy of this of the policy statements, a policy statement. If you can go to the next slide, please. There's also a section on regional environmental quality and natural resources and parks. The difference being obviously climate has to do with climate. There's environmental issues such as air, clean air, ozone that is related to climate. But in this section, we're talking about those issues that have primarily a regional ecological air quality, water quality concern. So again, I highlighted the 3 positions that I thought were of most interest to this group, although perhaps all of these would be. Next slide, please. Okay, so what to expect in 2024? Frankly, I actually had a meeting this morning with Jacob Smith from CC4CA to get a little bit of his input, because I don't quite know what to expect in terms of climate initiatives that are coming forward. So these are some of the ideas that were shared with me. The first one I was very well aware of, which is that the land use bill will come back in some form, probably in pieces. As you will recall, it was very broad, it had to do with preempting cities and requiring them to allow ADUs and eliminating occupancy standards and allowing upzoning single family to quadplexes, having greater densities in transit-oriented corridors, and more. So very significant. Our council was supportive, at least the majority of our council was supportive. But it took on way too much and the bill did not pass. So a rare loss for the governor, I would say. And he will come back with when I say land use bill 2.0, it's probably land use bills 2.0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, because they're gonna break it down. So some of the issues, like, for example, requiring ADUs, making cities allow for ADUs. It's gonna be a bill in it of itself. It might be tied with occupancy standards, making it more controversial, but that will make it more likely to pass. There's gonna be a bill on transit, increasing transit funding, thus making it easier to then perhaps as an incentive to require cities to build more density in these areas that will now have more transit funding, more transit. So obviously an example of a bill that is both land use, transportation, and very much of environmental concern, as well as affordable housing, because that is ultimately the goal that the governor was seeking. And I will say that his primary objective was, let's address our affordable housing crisis by getting rid of artificial constraints on the market. If we allow the private owners of property to build, especially in poor areas, there'll be a greater supply, assuming the demand doesn't change dramatically, which maybe is a false assumption to have. We will thus have, if not lower prices, the increase in prices would be lower, and there will be a greater variety of housing options. He also recognized, and this is also a really important way to achieve our greenhouse gas objectives, and it's important for our transit to make our transit successful, and it's important for equity and inclusiveness. But it was driven by affordable housing, so I think that'll continue to be the primary objective in this next session. So it'll be really interesting to see how that comes forward and how we get involved from a climate and other perspectives. Community choice energy, again, I'm sure you're aware of this, at least I'm assuming you're aware of it, so I won't explain it, other than to say that having studied the issue, because of previous legislation that came out of Boulder and other advocates within Boulder supported the studying of is community choice energy a possibility. The study was concluded. Now there is a serious attempt to pass legislation that would enable CCE. So essentially, cities would then have the option to partake in community choice energy, be able to buy energy directly from wholesalers, and to wheel it or basically have it transmitted on Xcel's power lines. So they basically be required to allow cities to use those power lines for a fair cost. Whereas right now they would be loath to allow us to have those direct contracts. So obviously we support choice. Who doesn't support choice? That being said, it's not going to be easy. So the bottom line is a lot of people, a lot of the energy at the state on the environmental front is working with Xcel. And so the idea is very much, let's get Xcel to be as aggressive as possible in reducing their carbon emissions by 2030. They have to meet at least 80%. They're about to release a report that might show that they are going to release or try to attain an even more aggressive level of reduction. So there are those that are concerned that this legislation would be a distraction for Xcel, because they are trying to meet their more aggressive portfolio of resources. Perhaps a distraction for local governments who might choose to focus on CCE implementation. So Boulder is supportive of it. So that's not going to change, but you all need to know that there are headwinds that this bill will be fighting. And in any event, should this bill pass, it'll take a while before there is the actual ability for cities to thus take advantage of it. You know, I was talking to Jonathan today. He said it could be 3, it could be 4 years. And even then, that would be beginning the contracts between a city and the renewable energy provider. On-bill financing has been talked about for many years. So the whole idea being that you want to buy some improvements for your home to make it more efficient or to add renewable energy, solar, what have you, heat pumps. But you're not ready to pay it back all at once. Can it basically be paid through multiple payments on your bill? And that's what my understanding of what this bill would do. So that's something that's being talked about as returning. Emerging technologies, really fascinating area, which I spoke about last year, that there's our energy office is really interested in making Colorado a leader on things like hydrogen to fuel trucks, for example. Doesn't really make sense to put hydrogen in your passenger vehicle. A little easier when you have a large truck and the standard fueling stations and the larger capacity storage. Geothermal, if I recall what was being talked about here, is a lot of times we're drilling wells to get oil and gas, and along with it, or even after the case, we can go in there and get heat from these deep wells that have already been drilled, and basically that can be source of direct air capture. Just looked to an NPR story that yesterday, how increasingly there's I think it's been focused in Texas right now, but there's a lot of attention in trying to get carbon out of the air with big machines that are basically sucking it out and pulling in the carbon, and then take the carbon and re-inject it, or to somehow make it stationary so it doesn't return to the atmosphere. Of course, the big challenge is, are you using more energy than you are? Are you creating more of a problem? Are you using more carbon than you are sequestering? And how expensive is it? But those in the know, including our energy office, think that all three of these technologies are ones that we should look into, and that Colorado should be a leader, and that we should be passing policies and providing the funding so that we can be part of this revolution of different sources of renewable energy, as well as different ways of addressing climate mitigation. And I know this brings up a bunch of issues, so I'm sure this is something interesting to you. I understand that there is an increased challenge with interconnect charges that the utilities, Xcel in particular, is charging to connect. Somebody might want to put solar panels on, and they may be that final home that makes Xcel have to make a significant expansion in their investment of infrastructure to handle that additional load that would be coming. And so there is issues about how do we ensure that there's a good partnership and an incentive to have this local renewable energy generation not be discouraged because of the infrastructure limitations, while recognizing that, of course, Xcel does need to make sure that they have the sufficient infrastructure. So, what is the correct balance that making sure that we can incentivize this generation and while meeting the Xcel's needs. Bills on air quality and ozone reduction. There was an effort that the county took a lead on last year, and they had a lot of equity issues that included that did not pass. Ozone reduction is another one of those issues that checks so many boxes. I mean, it is an equity issue. Those who have to work outdoors, those who live closest to the sources of pollution, whether it's stationary or mobile sources. Like I said, it's a climate issue. It's well, probably a few others I can't think. So that's something we're going to be tracking closely and will likely engage in. The greenhouse gas roadmap is now due for renewal. So there's an effort underway to revise it called Roadmap 2.0. And our staff, including Jonathan, are participating in roundtables to share our ideas and how it should be expanded. Not quite sure what that's going to look like yet. It's pretty important, powerful document. It's been years since I've actually read it closely, but I remember when I first looked at it, it was pretty clear that it broke things down into economy, the different sectors of our economy, transportation, buildings, oil and gas, and what have you, energy, and what is the percentage reduction that will need to be made from each one, and by when, and then some actual strategies on how to get there. So taking that to the next level, a 2.0 is going to be obviously really important for us to be involved with. For that, and for all of these, frankly, most of these, we'll be working closely with CC4CA, again, that climate coalition that we work with and are very actively partnering with them both in terms of helping to give them ideas, but also to learn from them the various information that they obtain, because they have policy folks attending these meetings at the Regional Air Quality Control Council, full-time people at the General Assembly, specifically on climate. So we're going to rely heavily on that team and lead when we need to and participate all the time. Finally, wildfire mitigation resources. I understand that this will be an issue that will be again addressed. Last time, I think I told this group that one of the biggest challenges we had was that we want to cut down the trees as need be to avoid the disastrous wildfires. But we are limited in doing so because there are certain days it's not safe to cut trees down. It can lead to an unintended wildfire. Or there are days where our air quality is so poor that the last thing people want to do is to allow more air pollution to be generated. That being said, there is a need. Or the third constraint is there could be days that are just too windy. Or other factors that would make it undesirable to have a controlled burn on that day. And yet we have to find a way to do it. So we need to partner with the Department of Natural Resources, whether it's regulatory, whether it's better communication, so that we can get out there and get in front of these things as needed. And not let a ozone pollution day prevent us from doing what's necessary to protect hundreds, if not thousands of homes and individuals. So how do we strike that balance? So those are some of the topics that I know of. I'm eager, that concludes my presentation. I'm eager to hear what you might know in terms of things that are coming forward, or what questions you might have about some of these ideas, or anything else you'd like to learn about in terms of how we go about advocating externally. And again, when we talk about policy advocacy, when I speak about that, it's not what we're asking our council members about policy, it's all the other entities that are influencing our city. And apologies for such a disorganized presentation up front.
So guys, we're half an hour from the 8 o'clock mark, so let's try to allocate 15 minutes for discussion. Again, 3 minutes each. Everybody has the opportunity to ask questions and discuss, okay? I guess I'll start. I'm really interested in that carbon capture measure you mentioned. I've seen some of those proposals where I work. So, but I feel like that's more of a federal issue, like, because that would be more of a NSF push. Where the federal government will need to like create some initiative and then provide the funding for all the academics to go and develop this technology. So I don't know, I mean, I'm really curious about it, but I don't know, like, I don't see the state of Colorado or, you know, the city of Boulder or like a big push.
Yeah.
So for example, a few years ago, there was a push by the National Nuclear Security Administration to mature the development of these metal mounts, which they're important for certain applications. And it was like, you know, an inter-laboratory initiative. And by laboratory, I mean all those like, you know, Manhattan Project laboratories are still in place now. And they allocated a ton of money for that. And there were like all these different groups working on it. And there was a lot of science that came out of that, like a lot of projects, a lot of materials, papers, manufactured pieces, manufacturing methodologies. It was like a 5-year push, I think. But that was a big science, a lot of money initiative. And I think this carbon capture thing, I think it's really interesting. If there was like a push from above, from the federal government, instructing the labs to start investigating that, or the universities, and say, here's all this money, go research it. I think people will actually do it. I know like there was one, at least I remember, there's always a call for proposals at the lab every year where you say, I want this much money to research something. And I remember at least one of them was on carbon capture. I don't know if I was funded. I didn't follow up on that because it wasn't my department, but there is interest on that.
There is work going on in national labs on this. My brother-in-law is a geologist working on carbon capture at NETL, which I can't remember what it stands for, but it's in Pittsburgh and Albany, Oregon.
Okay.
So there is at least a subset of national lab work being done.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and in terms of like, how does this translate to like potential Colorado policy and how would Boulder potentially be involved? So there's companies that are now looking for homes. Texas apparently is already taking the lead. Clearly, they conveyed to these companies that they would be a good home for their work. That's why it's already beginning in Texas. So how do we make Colorado attractive for this kind of investment, this kind of exploration studies? That could look at many different ways. One thing that I know is that a lot of environmentalists see this and they say, oh no, because what you're going to do is allow people to continue to burn gas. This doesn't, what we need to do is make sure that we focus on just producing the combustion of carbon. And so there are those purists who might say this runs afoul of it. To me, in my mind, that's taking the eye off the prize, which is like stopping climate change and how we get there. Everything's important, reducing carbon emissions as well as carbon capture. So that can take place in terms of our state policies, our greenhouse gas roadmap. What is it that we're going to require? What are the incentives that we're going to create? And what's the position that Boulder is going to have on it, So for example, on this direct air capture, there was an oil and gas company that says, we can use this to create oil and gas with a net zero carbon footprint, but they would still be creating oil and gas. And don't ask me to explain exactly how they were doing it. Basically, maybe it was like an offset or something like that. And their argument was oil and gas is still going to be needed for quite a while as a bridge fuel until we get to alternatives. You can imagine many people saying no. And that maybe will be Boulder's position as well. But there's policy decisions that will need to be made, not just at the federal level, perhaps has the biggest lever to pull in terms of both resources and even mandates. But I think there's going to be opportunities at the state level too. If you guys have any other thoughts on that, I'd be curious.
I just wanted to add one piece. I know we're short on time, but just know that this has already been in the policy pipeline. Sorry, a little plan answer. But House Bill 1210, which passed this past session, really mandated the Colorado Energy Office, the Office of Economic Development and CDPHE to develop a carbon capture roadmap. And so part of that planning is to look at what are the policies that we need to now build from that to say, what's the infrastructure that we would need to put in place? What are the economic drivers that we would need to put into place? How would we incentivize private companies to do more capture and sequestration? So it's kind of the next round of developing and building out that roadmap. So I think that's one area why I think you're seeing that on this list is that the roadmap identified a number of pinch points that we can't really move forward until we continue to kind of fine tune some of the policies at the state level. That was the directive of that bill. Whether we agree with it or not agree with it, that's just really what the directive has been.
So I'll just keep it to one question that's maybe a bit general. But as we learn more about the details of each of these bullet points that you've outlined, can you give us a kind of specific path as a board of say we have a response, kind of our trajectory towards responding to that on, say, a state level, is it? We discuss things as a group and bring ideas to city council and they bring that into play, or kind of what are our options pathway for us as a board to really kind of pinpoint what we have suggestions on or opinions that we want to kind of bring into the higher levels.
Yeah, so I think communication have to go on both ways. You all need to be made aware of what's been introduced. Especially in terms of bills, so that you can then have that to review and consider. But I would like to hear from you as a board. And I do say that would be my goal, or if you want to provide a recommendation, council that works as well. But if you give me your recommendation, I will nonetheless carry it forward. But that requires one of you to come speak to carry that message to council networks as well. But essentially what would help is if you all as a board say, you know, I now have the policy statement that Carl's about to give you. And 2 weeks from now, or whenever you meet again, you decide, you know what's really missing, so-and-so. And you decide, at least the majority of you decide that that should be added. Let me know. I will then carry that forward as a recommendation from the Environmental Advisory Board. And whatever reasoning you have, of course, is important. What you don't have to do is like wordsmith it. So you may, for example, on carbon sequestration, say, you know, there should be a policy that the city supports carbon sequestration with the following caveats or something like that, because this is important for whatever reason, economically, whatever it may be. Of course, drawing a connection to Boulder will make it more likely that we have the credibility, and you know, people will say, well, why do you care? So when you come up with ideas, coming up with that nexus, and a lot of it is just going to come down to like, well, we have climate goals, and so it's the world problem. It just happens that we have to work issues that are statewide. This is so in terms of getting you information, I do provide an update to our directors. Part of it is confidential, frankly, because it's has a lot of strategic conversations among some people that put in our legislators, that it's not information for me to share. But what I can share is I do create a dossier of all the bills that have been introduced and our positions, including whether we're just waiting to decide on something. That is something that I think we can get to you. And I could share that regularly with Jonathan, and that could be something that you must have available to you.
I mean, if I can speak briefly, like we don't meet, given the pace of the Capitol, we do not meet frequently enough as a board to have any sort of like long-term, like bill by bill, super impactful effect there. I think as a board, it would be best suited that like, again, before session starts, we can just shape the direction that the city takes. But I mean, the Capitol is things change wildly day by day. It's just so hard to like, if we're meeting once a month, actually have a like back and forth in a way that is productive as a board.
I agree. I'm just throwing it out there as an option.
At the same time, I mean, like this carbon capture is gonna be like an ongoing discussion, you know, for the next 5 years, maybe, or 10 years, right? Like, I think we could take a position as a board and say we're gonna support this forward. So when it does come up, you already know our position, and you can bring it, if it does come up.
I think that the important thing there is we're taking a position on a board on an issue as opposed to on a bill. I think that we would be most productive to take positions on issues.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, carbon sequestration, you can go, this is something that we want to see more of, we want to see research. There's like any direction that Carl and his team can take in like pushing the mark forward on that specific issue is great, but like working on bills.
No, I agree with that. But I mean, seeing the bills will help us at least see trends in the issues that the legislature is interested, you know. So at least we could like say, okay, this came up, this would have been a good thing to weigh on. If it does come up again, this is our position on that issue.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think with the bills itself, maybe not, but in terms of like figuring out the issues and the trends, we can figure out what positions we want to take. So it might be a value to share that with us.
Sure. Absolutely. Jonathan, is that something that we could? connect with later?
Yep.
Good.
Greg, sorry, go ahead. You have any questions?
This lets me know that I have a lot of homework to do. I don't think I've read anything specific about what you do yet. Like, I think I've gotten information, but I haven't read it. And so I know I have a lot of homework to read because it does seem like it's really important. It's like you're saying, like, we have impact on policies, but not necessarily day to day. But that being said, I'm curious about what you said about fire mitigation and trees and, you know, like, I didn't know the city specifically does. Like, I know that up in the mountains, we do a lot with fire mitigation. And a lot of it has to do with removing dead trees. But then how does that balance with like Cool Boulder, like wanting to have more trees?
Yeah. But technically, yeah, it's like managing trees in the forest, which means controlled burns at times, so that we don't have an out of control burn. Right. While planting trees in the urban environment, so that we have cooler sidewalks, cooler homes that are built around it, safer spaces for people. Interesting number, I'm sure you've heard about it, how much it can reduce the amount of heat that your home is subject to. So yeah, in fact, one of the things that Brett Concurrent is working on is creating a workforce that can be trained to be available both to be part of the mitigation in the forest. So help cut down trees there, and help plant trees here. Right, trees are the biggest part of the solution, but it's less here and more there, or you know, so it's just managing it. Right. Yeah.
I don't have any particular questions that
Okay.
you voiced in this space.
And we can punt this too. You mentioned something of, I think maybe you were getting direct air capture and carbon offsets. Mix up. Does the city do any offs? We don't do offsets, do we? Okay,
Absolutely not.
okay, great.
Absolutely. And we can talk about this later. We're on the record many times that we would never, at least our policy today is we do not use RECs or offsets to meet any of our community goals.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I won't begin to try to explain what I was trying to say there. It's basically this company that was saying we can continue to do oil and gas, do so without net carbon emissions. And maybe what they were saying is it's offset by what we sequestered from.
What are
the
your
air,
indulgences?
yeah.
Okay,
But I can't remember exactly what the argument was.
Sorry.
It was an example of a very controversial,
I'm sure.
you know, it's like, oh, really? We're gonna use this carbon capture to promote oil
Right.
production, so it could get really.
Well, thank you. I'm gonna want to dig into all this further too.
Well, I'm gonna go over and get a copy of those policy statements, bring them back, and I do encourage you, please do, there's like. First page of it explains how we use it, how we use this policy statement. It's just about, it's about the process. Look at that, look at the section on climate and environment. And please do think about what's missing and what you might like to add, recommend for your next meeting or what have you. I'll be right back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, I will suggest maybe moving my update to the next meeting, and then we can just go over the council calendar preview in the last 10 minutes we have.
I'm happy, whatever you.
Okay, so I guess I'll make a motion to move item 5C to our next meeting. Anybody second that?
I'll second.
Okay. Then I'll leave the floor to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And this is a little bit of a mop up on the policy conversation. I saw a number of those bullet items that Carl was referring to about perhaps some anticipated items coming forward. And I appreciated the comments from all of the board members. Just know that we're heavily involved in a lot of those topics. And in fact, we often get called on to either be like major drafters of some of those items to either contribute pretty heavily or at least review any potential bill language. But a lot of it depends on what we see come out as a bill. And so taking it from concept to a piece of legislation is sometimes a little bit tricky. Then the other thing I just wanted to mention too is Carl, obviously did an amazing job talking about kind of how we think about policy in the legislative space. Another huge area of work, particularly for my team, is in the regulatory space. We spend a gob of time. In fact, we have a full-time person working on policy at the Public Utilities Commission because it's been so vital for us to be successful in that venue. That is the body that really oversees our utility providers. So rather than us trying to fight the utility directly, we work with our Public Utilities Commission to change the rules. And we've been incredibly successful, more than any other community that I know of, in helping shape our regulatory policy at that level. We also engage at other agencies like the Air Quality Control Commission, which is part of CDPHE. So we spend a lot of time in those agencies, and that's all part of our overall policy platform. So.
Yeah, I could make a comment. We've been many times told, this is where we most need you at the PUC. These are some of the most important decisions. Actually, I just scheduled a meeting with Matt Lehrman to make sure that our policy statement is inclusive of direction on where we want to go. You know, I know we get involved in a lot of dockets. What I don't know is if we have enough policy positions here that connect to it.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we're going to try to do.
Okay, good.
So it'll be. This used to be a legislative agenda. It's a policy statement now. It reflects two things. One, it's not just legislative, it's policy more broadly. It's a statement, not just an agenda, because it's not just what's coming up this next session. It could be things, as you said, over the next 5 years. So just a little background on for this.
So I guess I would start on this next piece by just flagging for all of you. Oh, yes.
Just a quick question, since there's a printed copy, do we have an electronic copy that I can get?
No, we not. Oh, checking that. There's electronic copy. I was almost eager to get rid of these because we're going to be creating new ones, right? If you denied, we didn't know to give it to you. So not be wasting paper if you change this.
Well, I can't see.
Oh, okay.
Visually impaired.
I see. Okay, I'm sorry. So we do have a PDF online, and actually, would that work for you or?
Yeah,
Okay, because we just we're having a conversation about accessibility. And I want to make sure that our PDF version is accessible regardless of what your parents, you or anyone else has. So, and I'm not sure how well it works for that purpose.
Right.
So would you like me to send you the link?
That'd be awesome.
Okay, I'll do that.
We can get it.
Sure. I'll send it to
Get
you.
it to Heather.
Yeah, I'll make myself a note.
So let me just kind of kick off and say, give you a little bit of glimpse of your next month's meeting. Obviously, I think we referenced that there's going to be a pretty full agenda. One of the things that we are wanting to bring, really eager to bring to you, is this idea of updates to our energy code, which I referenced a little bit earlier. So we had a conversation with council, I think, as you all know, not that long ago, talking about how we synchronize some of the updates to the energy code and then to the code, what each of those means, what our outcome is, what's our objective in those updates. Again, it's not just to turn the dial, but really to think about how do we seek the outcome right now. It's really looking at how we drive gas out of our portfolio, particularly in our existing buildings. Obviously, we can do that easily with new construction. So that's a big piece of what we're going to be talking about next month. So I would encourage you to just flip your packet all the way over, and you'll see that there is a bulleted list and some things I just wanted to highlight that I'd like to consider bringing, or at least getting on the board's agenda. There are a few things that I think are probably important. One, not to necessarily provide input, but there is the overall budget. So the city just released its 2024 budget. Of course, that includes my department's funding and how it starts to align around our sustainability, equity, and resilience framework. That's the piece that I think is more interesting to all of you, how we're doing that. This is our second year and really starting to hit our stride, and all of the departments were asked to really align their budget around that framework. And so you can start to see how it's showing up in that way. Second, you go about halfway down, there is going to be a conversation, and I'm not seeing any detail on this yet, but just wanted to flag for all of you, there is an item called Boards and Commissions Assessment Initial Recommendation. The city manager's office had hired an independent evaluator to start looking at the overall portfolio of boards and commissions. understand what are some things that are really working. They did a lot of interviews, maybe some of you participated in those interviews. And I think there are going to be some recommendations. I honestly could not predict what that would look like. I don't know yet, but that's something that I'll make sure that you're all aware of in our results or recommendations. Then you see on November 9th, the Energy Code overview and update. That's an opportunity to give council a view of what we're going to be bringing back to them. The reason we sequence it that way is what we come back with is an actual ordinance. And so what we'd like to signal to them is, hey, when you see the update, here's what we're targeting. We're really going to be focusing on gas, or we're going to be focusing on these kind of performance measures within the Energy Code. Is that the kind of thing, council, that you want to see in the ordinance? That's what we're going to be talking to you all about next month to get your input, that then we can take to council and say, here's the package, here's what we're thinking about in terms of the update to the Energy Code. So that'll be on November 9th. You already have that on your trajectory. The water efficiency plan update, working to figure out how to get that in front of you as well. It's not an area that we spend as much time, and I think we probably should as a board, talking about some of the other elements like water. So there are a number of master plans that are moving forward for updates. One is the water efficiency plan. And we've just gotten into the point now of looking at some of the potential updates to that plan. So I'll make sure that we get that on your trajectory if it's something that you want. So I'm just seeking some feedback from all of you, but yeah, I see some nodding heads, so that's helpful. Some other things I would just kind of pop down to the last two bullets. Boulder Junction implementation. So that's looking at the land use map updates as part of the Boulder Valley Comp Plan, how we think about that. We're already, I think, connected, Huron's connected into that. So I think there's going to be some good opportunity to make sure that the board's feedback is carried forward in any of that implementation. And then you see on December 21st is the second reading of the Energy Code ordinance. So that's when we actually will bring the ordinance back to council. So making sure that if there was any feedback, if it didn't get in the ordinance and you want to take another bite at that, we can do it as we prepare the ordinance. So those are the things that are at least on my radar that I think are probably important for you all to be thinking about in this last quarter. But if you saw anything else in there and you said, hey, would love to hear about what it is, but happy to entertain that as well.
I guess I'll just vocalize that it would be great to, if possible, get the water efficiency somehow to our ears. I don't know if that's possible, but I'd like to hear more about that.
As it turns out.
I know.
Yeah, this looks good.
I have my action items.
I guess I do have a question in preparation for next week, since it sounds like we'll be talking about the Energy Code.
Yes.
So is the idea that this is being brought back to us, it will then be brought back to council? Are we trying to come up with a statement kind of next week that, or initiate forming a statement that we want to be implemented to bring to council?
Thanks for the question.
What does that look like?
Yeah, the way that'll work is we'll be coming back. So Carolyn Elam from my team, along with some representatives from the planning department, will come back and they will say, here was the directive that we had from council from our study session in terms of what they are really interested in seeing our update achieve. Why are we doing an update to the Energy Code? Why is it insufficient right now? Is it just like we just cannot continually update it? Well, no, you do it because it helps us achieve our objectives. So what are those objectives? What are we doing within the code? What are the impacts of those changes to the code, good and bad, unintended and otherwise? And so we'll lay all that out and say, here is our proposal in updates to the Energy Code. There'll be specific questions. What do you think about specific recommendation X, Y, and Z? Do you think that we should include this or not? Do you have feedback on how it's being proposed in terms of the ratcheting up or down or whatever it might be? And then you as a board will provide your feedback and say, it doesn't have to be unanimous, right? It could be one board member said this, or the board unanimously agreed that X. We'll capture that to the best that we can. I will make sure that you see a copy of whatever that is, that summary. That then gets dropped into the overall memo, staff memo that will go along with the draft ordinance to city council. So what they will see is, here is our analysis, here's our recommendation, here's the feedback from if there was public feedback, and here is the EAB's feedback. Council will read that, they'll take that into account, and then they'll give us recommendations to say, yes, we like all this, or we'd like you to tweak this one a little bit, or take this one out. And then we bring it back to them for final adoption.
Thank you.
For what it's worth, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think council requested staff to be even be more aggressive on their code update, if I remember correctly from the meeting. So, we had some suggestions and stuff, but then council requested to go a little further and like put more requirements on the code, so they'll update us on that as well.
Just to clarify, their feedback around going further was to really identify and start to explore what an electrical only requirement would look like within the energy code. How would we do that? So this is, again, going back to the idea that we've now gotten to this point. I just want to emphasize this point, that we use the energy code specifically around efficiency, right? It's about consumption of electricity within our buildings. And so what we do is we turn that dial, we click it, each time we do an update, and make it harder and harder to, or more and more efficient within buildings. But that has unintended consequences sometimes, whether it be cost or the ability to actually achieve those performance standards. It's tough. We have really aggressive codes when it comes to energy efficiency. So we are to that point now where we have to match up what is the carbon intensity of our grid power, and are we achieving the benefit that we want by just using less of it? And we're at that point where we see kind of the end of the line with regard to grid power, that we know where we're going to get. You heard Carl talk about it. We know we're going to be close to 95% into knowing that today. And I think we're going to be further by 2030. This is our opportunity to use the code to start addressing some of the other priorities, which is how do we think about gas use within our buildings? So we're going to take a little bit of a different shift and say, let's not just take this opportunity to turn the crank once more. Let's really think about how we use the code for the impact that we want, which is why you heard council say, let's explore what does it look like to require electric only, either in new construction. How do we do it within our existing building stock? What would that look like? So that was a really keen focus that council had at the study session. Sorry, that was long, but.
Helpful.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Sorry, Heather, I missed item 6, which is the RTD EcoPass changes. Anything important?
Yeah, really quick update. RTD announced earlier this month that they are moving to a digital only pass. So instead of your EcoPass cards that some of you have and some of you we just requested, it's moving to a mobile app. So it kind of took us by surprise. It was a little unexpected that would apply to board members as well. So just keep an eye out over the next few weeks for an email about how to access that and any steps you need to take.
Thank you. Okay, so last item is just letting you know the next EAB meeting is scheduled for October 4th at 6 p.m. And I think that's about it. So I'm gonna motion to adjourn this meeting. Unless anybody has any final comments or questions.
Second that.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well done, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.